Hey guys, I'm Marshall. I'm the owner of Going Gear. If you've never met me before, this is my good friend Don, sootch00, superstar of YouTube, you know, super famous, you know, multinational star. We got here helping us. That's going to talk to us about knives. So we get a lot of questions about knives. We've done classes on flashlights before. We've done go bags. We've done backpacking, and obviously knives are one of our big categories. You know, we have all these display cases filled with knives, and people ask, what do I get when I spend $20 versus $200? What do the different blade shapes mean? What do the materials mean? So that's what we're going to talk about today, just the basics of knives and what you get when you spend more, what you get when you get the different materials, what we prefer, and all that kind of stuff. I always like to give a shout out to the guys who help us out at our events. So this video is made during our 7th anniversary sale and party that we do every year. And Marietta Pizza Company gave us free pizza. All right. So every year we get a bunch of giveaways, and this year is no exception. A bunch of really great vendors gave us some stuff. So big thanks to Olight, Southern Grind, Smith, Boker, CRKT, Surefire, Grand Trunk, 511, and Black Diamond. They gave us thousands of dollars worth of stuff to give away to you guys. Big thanks to them. We appreciate that, and it's very much appreciated when we do that kind of stuff. So we have this buying guide on the website. It's not complete on there. We're going to add some more stuff on there, but you can always watch the video, or we're going to have this information available on the website if you want to go back and refer to it and learn about blade shapes and steels and all that kind of stuff. So the things we're going to talk about are what you're going to be using the knife for, so general usage, size of the knife, types of steels, colors and coatings, handle materials, fixed versus folding, production, mid-tech, and custom, price range, and then blade shapes and blade grinds. Kind of all the stuff that we always get questions about. So when we went over the flashlights, the two biggest things that we have a lot of people consider when you're buying pretty much anything in our store are price, because budget's going to dictate what we're going to be able to tell you. We're not going to try to sell you on a $400 knife if you got 20 bucks to spend. And usage, what are you going to be using it for? You know, a tiny little knife's not going to be appropriate for some larger, heavier duty tasks, and vice versa. You know, maybe you're in a jurisdiction or you're going to visit a country where you can't carry automatic knives or even locking knives or anything like that. So usage and price are the two main things that's going to determine a lot of the rest of what we're talking about. What do you think? Well,
you know, definitely when you're considering what you're going to carry, you know, the most common carrying knife is about 2 3/4 inches to about 4 inches. That's pretty much as far as the blade goes. That's about the average, overwhelmingly the average. So you get too small, the task get a little bit harder to get to, you know, you don't have the strength you need. You get a little bit large, you start falling into it being heavy, you know, it's legal problems possibly, and things like that. But I think that range, if you're wanting something for EDC, and if that's what you're looking for, then, you know, the just under 3 inches to about 4-inch blade is just that sweet spot. And so that's one of the big things to consider. Now, if you're looking for an all-around just good knife or field, you can't beat a fixed blade. I mean, there are some exceptional, in fact, I think the Adamas is right here. This is an exceptional folding knife. It'll withstand, I believe it's up to 600 pounds, I believe, the lock on this thing. So this is really exceptional. But honestly, if I had my choice, I would go with the standard full tang fixed blade. Because if you bend this enough this way, you know, it's not going to be 600 pounds. So, you know, there's some things to consider as far as tools like that, because, you know, if I was in a survival situation, this is according to what you're looking for, a survival situation, you definitely want a fixed blade knife. In everyday use, to me, as far as just something handy, having a good folding knife is exceptional. I know some of you guys in here are carrying fixed blades on your belts, and that's great, you know, and that's a really good strong knife. So again, you know, I think just reiterating what are you looking for, and two, what is your job? What do you do regularly? You know, some of you guys are doing things like slicing. Some of you guys are cutting cord or something like that. So, you know, looking at the type of edge that you have on your knife. So I don't want to get too far over, but
You skipped like 3 sections ahead, man.
That's okay, we can jump right back.
That's all right. So yeah, we talked about usage, and that's one of the very primary things that you're going to be determining a lot of the rest of this stuff. So we're going to kind of skim over usage because we're going to talk about it in pretty much every other section. And Don touched on size, and he's right. You know, about the 3 1/4, 3 1/2 inch knife is pretty much the majority of what we sell. And the knife I carry in my pocket, I know people are always going to ask, zero tolerance 0562 CF is a 3 1/2 inch blade. I think the one that Don has is a 3 1/4 inch blade. So he's got the 566 CF from Zero Tolerance as well. And it's a good shape. It's large enough to do your larger cutting tasks, even something as simple as slicing through an apple. And if you think about the size of an apple, if you have a little 1 1/2 or 2 inch blade, it's kind of difficult to slice a piece off. So I mean, you think about the kind of tasks you're going to be doing on an everyday basis. Most of us are just opening boxes and opening packaging for most of the time. Maybe you're cutting it a little bit of rope, stuff like that. If you're taking it camping, you know, you're opening your meals, you're cutting kindling, all those kind of things. So you think about the things you do on a daily basis with your knife, and a lot of that's going to determine the size. Maybe something smaller is more appropriate. And again, maybe you're in a place where small is all you can carry legally. And if you can carry a knife, you know, it's not really worth getting in trouble carrying something that's illegal, because the legal stuff usually is just fine. You can get a manual knife, and when I say manual, I mean you have to something that you actually have to push on the blade to get it open. There's no assisted opening, no automatic opening or anything like that. Manual knives, you can see, can be pretty darn fast, so you don't necessarily need an automatic in situations where you're not supposed to be carrying it. So definitely think about the usage and the size when you're buying your knife. You know, what are you going to be using it for? That's going to make a big determination on the type of size that you're going to get, is the kind of task you're going to do.
Well, and two, and I don't want to interrupt, but you know, self-defense, if you're carrying that knife as a self-defense option, you need to consider that. We'll look at that a little bit more with blade shape and size, but that is one of the considerations. And I think most of us, you know, it's kind of a dual purpose. You know, it's not something that I'm hoping to have to use because I have other means, but you know, the thing is in the last ditch, you know, the knife needs to be considered.
So price, you know, that's the big one that everybody asks about and talks about. What do you get with a $200 knife versus a $20 knife versus a $500 knife? The biggest things that you're going to get are going to be quality, types of materials, and that's pretty much it. You know, the quality, the fit and the finish of the blade. You're going to start getting into titanium and carbon fiber and higher end blade steels when you get to the more expensive stuff. When you get to custom makers, yeah, you may be paying for a name on some of those guys, but a lot of them you're going to be paying for a really high quality handmade knife. So is a $20 knife going to be able to do pretty much everything you need it to do for everybody? Yeah, absolutely, it will. Will a $200 knife last longer in terms of the edge retention and the quality and the fit and finish? Yes, it will. Is pretty much everybody okay with a $20 knife? Yeah, probably, but I know I've sold $200-300 knives to a lot of the guys in here, so it's all about what you value. You know, do you want that titanium on there? Do you want that carbon fiber? I do. I've got titanium on one side and carbon fiber on the other. I've got a high-end steel. I don't like to sharpen my knives. I'm lazy. So I mean, your softer steels, your $20 knives, even something that's really high quality like a Swiss Army knife that has a great reputation, they're using softer steels, which are easier to sharpen, but that also means you have to sharpen them more often. So that's what you're going to get when you're paying more. You know, you're not going to be paying, these aren't like high fashion brands where you're just paying for a name, you're not paying for materials. You're paying more for the materials, you're paying more for the quality. So that's something that's important to keep in mind. Do you have anything on that? I know you like expensive knives because you're always carrying expensive knives.
Well, you know, I feel like that if whatever you're going to carry, if that's what you're carrying every day, why not invest in that in something nice? You know, I mean, just like a watch. I mean, you know, yeah, you can go with a cheap watch and a cheap, but that's something that I do every day, my flashlight. So, and I use those tools more than any other thing, you know. So, I kind of look at it that way. So I carry really what I want to carry. Now, there are others that could care less about doing that. They just want something functional, and that's what trips their trigger, and that's what you should do. So, but you know, this does give you a lot of options, just like with firearms or anything else. I mean, you can spend, you know, $5,000 on a Wilson Combat, you know, but I mean, or you can spend $350 on a TP9. So, you know, it's just, but they both serve the same purpose. But to me, one of the big things is, you know, it's like Benchmade and ZT. I mean, those are just two that I just really like. I like it, and that's what I want. And carrying around something like this, to me, is money well spent. So.
Pretty much any knife that you can buy from us. We have probably 1,000 knives sitting in these glass cases around here are going to serve you for most functions. It's when you want to take it to the next level, when you want those nicer materials and the better edge retention and the better corrosion resistance. That's when you start paying more and you start looking at the nicer stuff. But again, it's all about, it's what you prefer and what you value. Another big thing we get a lot of questions about are the types of steel on blades. When you start getting into the higher end steels, are you going to be able to tell a difference? I can't. I really can't. Can you tell a difference between what's on a $20 knife versus a $200 knife? Absolutely. And the biggest two things are edge retention and corrosion resistance. So when I say edge retention, it's how many times can you cut something, you know, the same thing over and over before it starts getting dull. We start getting into the higher end steels like the M390 that's on this guy, or the newer versions you're using CTS 204P or S110V, or a lot of these numbers that probably mean nothing to most of you guys. They start getting into better steels. It's kind of hard to tell a difference between a lot of those once you get into the higher end stuff, but those versus like a flea market knife or a gas station knife, you know, that gets dull the second time you use it, versus I sharpen this, you know, every 3 or 4 months, and it still has a great edge on it at all times. So we're not going to get too deep into steels other than the basics, like stainless versus carbon. So stainless steels, it doesn't mean that it never stains, it means that it stains less. So stainless steels still can corrode, they're just much less likely. There are some steels out there, like Spyderco uses something called H1 that you can put in salt water and basically leave in salt water and it'll never corrode. Versus some stuff like D2 is a tool steel that's pretty popular that does corrode. You know, a lot of people carry it in their pockets and it corrodes. So again, it's all about the purpose that you're going to be using it for. There's trade-offs with all of those. But once you started getting into the higher end steels, any of the stuff that they call super steels, like the ones I was talking about, then you're pretty much good to go. You're going to get the good edge retention, you're going to get the good corrosion resistance, you're going to get a steel that can be hardened well and hold up really well. So don't get too stuck on types of steel. I know a bunch of guys on the internet are going to beat me up over that because I see all the wars going back and forth on the forums. But personally, I think once you get into the higher end stuff, you're good to go. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, I'm a big carbon steel guy. I love carbon. I like the way it cuts. I like the way it sharpens. Just in use, I can just tell I just tell a difference. If I go with stainless steel, which I mean I've got stainless steel in my pocket, but that's a great EDC knife. It stays sharp. It is good for corrosion resistance. But if I'm really doing something with a task in mind, I love carbon steel. And you know, I think one of the things that we need to learn, you know, a lot of times we'll buy a knife and we won't, you know, we'll have it in our pocket and we fiddle around in cut boxes, and cardboard, which is awful for that edge, you know, but that's pretty much all we do with it. But if you really get out and use a knife, there are some major differences, like whether you're doing survival stuff, you're cutting wood, or you're making, you know, feathers to, you know, those kind of things. You get out and start using that and start learning, it will teach you a lot about the different steels. There is a lot of quality. Now, most of the time I can't remember which is which, but I do know that the carbon steel I always enjoy a good carbon steel knife. So, you know, that's one of the things. And two, I guess, I don't know if we want to get into the hardness, which I think is important in this same subject.
Yeah.
But, you know, hardness really will keep a good edge retention. But the problem with hardness is that it can tend to be somewhat more brittle. And then if you have toughness, which, you know, there's a little bit soft because it gives a little bit, but it's really hard. It's just like this. If you took this knife and put it in a vise, and you took a hammer and you whopped it, if it was really hard, it's going to snap. But if it's really tough, it's going to bend. Now you've lost your shape, but still, you know, you've got to weigh these things out. And I think there's got to be a good balance. And if you can do if you're really wanting to get into steels, you'll have to do the research, because honestly, there's so many arguments about what's the best, what's this. This is D2 tool steel. It's excellent. I mean, I love this knife, and you know, there are a lot of things, but you know, for your task, for what you're doing, for the way you cut, it may not be what you're looking for. So, you know, getting out and getting experience. I'll give you one little story. I keep a Benchmade Barrage typically in my pocket. I just replaced it actually with this ZT, but that has been a great knife. And you know, they're not cheap. They're pretty expensive. But and I would keep it in my pocket, and when I was doing things, I'd pull out my junk knife to do whatever. You know, I'm sure some of you guys have been there. You know, you have a $200 or $300 knife in your pocket. You don't want to mess it up. Well, you know, one time I was down in the woods and I had my knife and it was all I had. So I pulled it out. I mean, I just said, I got to do this. It was doing some kind of review. And I'm cutting this thing up, and I thought, this is going to screw my knife all to heck. And you know, I finished, and the finish was beautiful. It didn't even look like it was touched. And I just thought, you know, what am I doing? Am I saving this for what? You know, let's use it. That's why I bought it. Yeah, there are $500 and $600 knives. You'd be a little crazy. But now, and I do reviews on knives sometimes that are $800 and $900. And my job is to beat them up. It kind of is like, you know, but that's, you know, I'm doing it so we can find out what they do. But don't be afraid to use your knife. To me, there's nothing worse than having a pristine, beautiful knife just sitting there. It needs to be used. It's a tool that was designed to be used.
Some of them are designed to be art.
Yeah, they are. They are.
You go to Blade Show and you see the ones encrusted with rubies and gold hilts and stuff like that. I don't think they intend for those to be used, but they're also 18 grand, so, you know, there are ones designed not to be used, definitely. Going back to the steels, stainless versus carbon, usually in general what we recommend is carbon steel for fixed blades, stainless for folding knives. You're honestly going to have a lot of trouble finding a carbon steel in a folding knife. I can't think of any that we sell, honestly. D2 is kind of a tool steel. It's kind of in the middle of stainless and carbon. But pretty much every knife that we sell is a stainless steel just because it's in your pocket. You know, it's in a sweaty, salty environment, and that tends to make things corrode. So if you had a carbon steel knife in your pocket, chances are it's going to get some corrosion pretty quickly. So that's just something to keep in mind. We actually had someone ask for a carbon knife earlier, and I was like, well, we unfortunately don't have anything for you. Another nice advantage that you're talking about with the toughness and bending and everything of the carbon steels is, like you said, that they tend to break, or they tend to bend instead of break. So the stainless steels, a lot of them are powder steels, and when they're stressed really heavily, like you're cranking on something, which you shouldn't be doing with a folding knife anyway, but we all do it, they tend to break instead of bend. And the carbon steels will bend and deform before they start breaking and chipping. So most of the fixed blades that we have are going to be carbon steel, like this K-bar right here. If you're looking for a good, inexpensive, all-around fixed blade knife, I can't recommend the Moras enough. They're not going to take any of the heavy beating like this K-bar is with the full tang. And we say full tang, what it means is the steel is all the way in here. So there's no skeletonized part. They didn't take out any parts in there. It doesn't taper off in the handle or anything like that. The steel goes from the front to the end, all the way around. And that just makes for a stronger knife versus something like the Mora or some of the like the fighting knives that K-bar makes. They use rat tail tangs where they taper off in here to a thin little point. And if you're stressing it this way, you know, you're doing some stuff that sometimes you're doing in the outdoors, you're prying something or, you know, picking apart some wood or something like that, then it can break. So that's something to keep in mind. But if you're using the knife as a knife and you're looking for a good beater garden knife, an outdoor go bag, anything like that, you can't beat the Mora knives. Most of them are around 20 bucks. And if you break it or you lose it, who cares, you know? It's not nearly as big of a deal as if you're doing $100 or $200 or $300. Story, Don loves his story, so I'm going to give a story. I use my Mora as my garden knife, and I've had it for probably close to 10 years now. I open bags of rocks. I stick my knife into a bag of rocks, drag it through the rocks, and man, I tell you what, it holds up great. It holds up well because that's what these kind of knives are designed for. It's a carbon steel blade. It holds its edge really well. You know, it doesn't mind getting dirty and grimy. So just make sure you get a knife that's appropriate for your task. I have used my zero tolerance in bags like that, and I always cringe because you start getting sand up in the mechanism and stuff like that. So a good fixed blade is great for tasks like that, or doing stuff in the outdoors where you have to worry about grime or your hunting or something like that, you worry about blood and guts and the mechanisms. A good fixed blade is great for that, and Moras are a nice, inexpensive alternative.
I like the ones with the, of course, that's like my fire with the fire steel right here.
Yeah, that's
a
Mora.
great, yeah. That's a great option, is getting the fire steel on here. It kind of is just a great combo knife.
We're talking about this guy. It's made by, or it's branded Light My Fire, but it's actually a Mora product. It has a fire steel built into the handle, and you can just pull it out, and all of a sudden you've got a fire starter and a decent fixed blade in one. So these are definitely cool. We've sold a ton of these over the years, but yeah, something like that.
On this one, since it's now, you know, been used.
Then we have to get another sample display, man. I can do that. That's poor business.
I was trying to help these guys out.
They are on sale today. So next thing we're going to talk about is colors and coatings. You know, we've got some coated blades up here. We've got some uncoated blades. A lot of that's honestly personal preference until you get into the carbon steels. Carbon steels, it makes a big difference for your corrosion, because if it's coated like this guy right here on this this 1095 carbon steel, you're doing any kind of wet tasks, and I apologize in every video, but I apologize for our door. I swear one day we're actually going to oil it. Probably not, but I'm going to say that I am in every video. But knives like this, where they're coated, you're doing some dirty tasks, you're splitting apart some wet kindling or something like that. It's nice because you don't really have to worry about cleaning and maintaining it all that much. And again, I'm pretty lazy, so stuff where I have to do less maintenance on it is great. So a coating makes a really big difference with the carbon steels, because then you don't have to worry about corrosion as much. With the stainless steels, it's going to be more looks than anything else. You know, some guys, we're honestly about 50-50 in our sales of the black coated blades, which is pretty much the only coating that most companies do, although Benchmade I think does some custom like green and stuff like that, versus uncoated. On a stainless steel blade, you don't have to worry about it as much. It's not really going to make as much of a difference. It's all personal preference. Black looks cool, satin looks cool. Just go with whatever you like best. What do you like?
Essie knives, you know, they do a Cerakote on their knives.
You get that bright green one.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's companies doing all kinds of fun stuff. You can get your bright green survival knife.
And you'll be surprised at how, you'll be surprised at how durable it can be.
It holds up really well. It's going to start getting some scratches in it, but the coating itself will last a really long time, and it holds up really well on either the stainless or the carbon.
But one thing too is this powder coat, a lot of times some guys will take and strip it off because they say it's hard to clean, but I did a knife review a while back, and the knife, after I finished, it looked awful. I mean, it was just completely just scratched up and just looked a mess. And I took carburetor cleaner, sprayed it off and scrubbed it off, and it all disappeared. It looked as good as new. And so, you know, but keeping your knives clean, you know, unless it's something that's just a strict utility knife, but even then, keeping them clean and keeping them well maintained is really smart. Even cheap knives, because they cut better.
Absolutely. And the biggest thing is keeping them sharp, like you said. So a good sharpening system. Lansky makes a pretty inexpensive one. If you want to go super high end, Wicked Edge makes an amazing one. Worksharp makes an electronic one, so one that's kind of like a little mini belt grinder that's awesome. There's a lot of different options out there for sharpening. The only thing I always try to talk people out of is the carbide sharpeners. The ones where when you drag your knife across it, you can see the shavings of the knife come off. That just, oh man. Like, we have guys that'll come in and we'll send knives back for warranty repair or something like that, and they use it, and literally half the blade will be gone. I mean, that's what the carbide sharpeners do. Every time you drag it across, you start seeing those metal shavings coming across, then that's your knife disappearing. So use a nice diamond or ceramic or you know, something that won't take your knife away after you use it a couple times. Handle materials. Handle materials, a lot of it's going to be preference. Well, honestly, pretty much all of the stuff is going to be preference. But it's all about what you like. For folding knives, I like the stuff that looks cool and feels cool and has nice lightweight. So I like carbon fiber, I like titanium. Do they have any benefits over the nice plastics or aluminum or stainless steel? Yeah, you start talking about weight and all that kind of stuff, but in terms of durability, not really. Benchmade's really well known for their Griptilians, and what it is, it's a fiber reinforced nylon. And it's the same that a lot of other companies are using. And people pick it up and they're like, oh, this feels really lightweight and cheap. And you're like, yeah, it's lightweight. You want lightweight. You know, something like this is a great backpacking knife where weight is a concern. And it holds up extremely well. You got a little bit of grippy surface to it, so it's nice. It's not going to slip out of your hand when it's wet or even when you pull on it. So some of the plastics can be great. A lot of people like aluminum because of its durability, and the only drawback I find with aluminum or any of the other metals is when it's cold. It's kind of uncomfortable to use, but that goes away after using it for about 2 seconds. But aluminum is a good material. G10 and micarta are a couple of really popular materials. So they're some epoxy materials. They hold up really well. Some of the micartas are pretty cool because when they start getting wet, it actually, if it's canvas micarta, it'll raise the fibers in the micarta and it'll get more grippy. So the fibers start coming out and it gets even harder to pull out of your hand. So for hunting knives and things like that, where it's probably going to have some moisture on it, it's nice to have. So there's a lot of different handle materials out there. It's just like all this other stuff. If you go with a reputable company, you go with a decent knife, then pretty much anything you get is going to be good to go. The only thing I'd caution against is if you're going to be using it as like a hard use knife, try to stay away from the ones that are like the polished stainless steel or polished titanium, which make great gentleman's knives, but when they start getting wet, they come out of your hands pretty easily. Do you have any thoughts on handle material at all? Oh
yeah, it's, you know, the thing is, especially not necessarily as much with folding knives, but with fixed blade knives, it's extremely important. There are hot spots that can, you know, especially when you're cutting large logs or you're doing some kind of batoning, you need to make sure that it's a good surface, but yet it needs to be grippable. So there's a balance there. As far as knives like, you know, your standard EDC knives, usually having a way to keep your hand from going across your knife, you know, is kind of important. So, and it doesn't have to be exaggerated. You know, this triage is great for that. It's an easy knife to hold on to. But with the this larger knife, the Adamas, having that, you tend to do more things with this, and so you're really going to need more of an aggressive guard. But again, knowing, taking the knife and putting it in your hands, and then you know, with the clip, making sure that it fits in your hand well. So that's not really material, but it really has to do with ergonomics.
Yeah, it ties back into handle, definitely. So the next thing we're going to talk about is production, mid-tech, and custom. We get a lot of questions about this, about what constitutes each type of knife. So with production knives, generally it's going to be something that's made 100% by a dedicated knife manufacturer. Like, that's what they do. They've got a bunch of people on the line making these knives. So Kershaw, Benchmade, Spyderco, K-Bar, all those kind of guys are production knives. Custom makers are generally going to be made by one person. They control the process from start to finish, or most of it anyway. Sometimes they're using CNC machines. They're pretty much all using grinders and bandsaws and all that kind of stuff. They're using power tools, but most of it's done by hand. You know, they're doing a lot of the hand finishing, and they're doing all the designing and everything. And kind of in the middle is mid-techs. So always people always ask me what mid-tech means, and that's another thing that there's a lot of debate on. But mid-techs to me are designed by a custom maker with his name on them, produced by a production company. So one of those production companies will make the knife for the custom maker, and they'll do some hand finishing. They may do the finishing touches like the sharpening and, you know, some of the handle materials and that kind of stuff. But mid-techs are usually going to have a custom maker on it, but he didn't do a whole lot of the production. He didn't do a whole lot of the stuff other than the final finishing. So we get a lot of questions on that. I just wanted to touch on that real quick. Last couple of things we're going to talk about are going to be blade shapes and grinds. So grinds, there's a lot of different ones out there. Again, unless you're doing some super specific task, most of the stuff you get, you're going to be fine. You're going to be good to go. A lot of the knives out there are going to have a double grind or a double bevel where the edge is going to be at a different angle than the rest of the blade. So like this Essie right here has a full flat grind, meaning it's just flat all the way down, and then on the end you've got another different grind. And what that is if you had this angle going all the way down to the tip, think about how thin that edge material would be. Then you start getting into problems of chipping and rolling, and when you're using the knife, it's just too thin on the edge. It doesn't hold up well. So they make it where it's less of a super fine angle, and they put, you know, a little bit more of like a closer to a right angle on it. just to give it some more durability. So you're going to see that on the vast majority of knives. There's a lot of other different ways of doing the edges out there. There's convex grinds, which are awesome. They're super high performance. Trying to think of some companies that are well known for them. I know some of the like LT Wright and Blind Horse knives do those, or Battle Horse, and Bark River and some other companies are using Bark River grinds, and are using convex grinds. And what it is it kind of goes up like that. So it's two curving points that go up to the tip. The only thing about that is they're kind of hard to sharpen. So you've got to use a strop usually, which you ever used a strop before?
Yeah, it's painful.
It's not that bad, but it's something you have to constantly maintain. And if you're somebody like me that's terrible about maintaining their knives, then something like that takes a little bit more effort. So your standard grinds are usually the way to go. And again, you're not really going to notice a difference for most of the stuff that you're doing. Do you have any thoughts on the knife edge at all?
No, I agree.
Yeah.
You can use them for different tasks, and if you really get into it, it's just like anybody. A lot of you guys like the details. I mean, really like to get into the details, and that's important. But really, you need to do your research because you like to do that too. So.
The only one that is specialized that's kind of nice is a chisel grind. But honestly, unless it's a chisel, then it's kind of, I don't know. I don't personally see a whole lot of use on it on a knife, but. I guess maybe as a pry bar or something like that, where you kind of got to wedge it into a crack and pop something open. But for the most part, your standard grind is the way to go. So we got all these knives out here. The last thing we're going to talk about is going to be blade shape. So the knives in both of our pockets, I think we both have drop points in our pockets. This is what you're going to see on most production knives. So what it means by drop point is you can kind of see you've got your edge here, and this is your belly, your curved part, and then the spine up here drops down to a point. And it's a nice general all-around knife. This is what a lot of people are going to use. If you think about the way that you cut, when you have the straight edges like these Wharncliffes, which I absolutely love the way this looks. I think it looks super cool, and it's the best box opener in the world, a Wharncliffe. But if you think about the way that you cut, you're not cutting your arms kind of moving in an arc. So if you're cutting something or you're slicing something, when you start getting down to the tip, you're basically trying to shove the entire knife down through the material, and it doesn't make as good of a slicing geometry or motion. So that's why most knives are going to have this curve here on the end, because when you're slicing through something, that's kind of the natural motion. So where the edge is on there is kind of always going to be in the same orientation, just from the natural movement of your hand and your arms. So that's why you see this kind of shape on most of the different geometries, is just because of the way that we slice and the way that we cut. Some other popular ones out there, you've got the Tonto blade right here, which is really good for piercing, because you've got this edge, and you've got the spine and everything that goes into this tip, and it's really strong, really great for piercing. For the average person, we usually try to talk people out of Tonto knives. The average person doesn't do a lot of stabbing and piercing. If you do, I'm kind of worried. It might scare me a little bit. But for guys overseas, guys doing combat duty and stuff like that, a lot of them like the Tonto knives because stabbing and piercing may be something that they need to do. So it's great for that. For general all-around purposes, I don't think it's as useful personally.
It's got a strong tip. One of the advantages of Tonto, typically it has a little bit stronger tip, but yeah, it's more of a specialty knife, and it's become very popular just because of it being,
looks cool.
Based on kind of a samurai. So if you're a samurai, I think you should get one. But
yeah, if you're piercing through samurai armor.
I mean, I think I like them, but as far as everyday use, clip point.
Yeah, you got clip point up here, so it's very similar to a drop point. So you can see the end of it up here is just kind of clipped off. You're going to get a lot of the same performance that you're going to get for the drop point. You got that same cutting motion in the edge on there, and then also you got a little bit of piercing. Even if you're not necessarily using it as a combat knife or self-defense or anything like that, piercing into some packaging or piercing into some wood to cut a little notch out or something like that. It's nice to have a tip on there that can get into the material and kind of work around on there. So that's why your drop point, your clip point are two of the most popular blade shapes out there.
Yeah, which is like the Bowie knife, and then the K-bar, you know, the standard K-bars like that. So
yep.
Good combat knife.
Some other ones that are pretty popular. This is, I think Benchmade calls this a modified sheep's foot. So it's kind of like the Wharncliffe. A traditional sheep's foot, what it is, it's a straight blade, and then at the end, instead of having this kind of long taper here, it just tapers off really quickly, so you get kind of a little quarter circle there on the end. That's a sheep's foot, so this is a modified sheep's foot. This one is designed as a rescue knife, so if you think about using this as a rescue knife, maybe you're cutting somebody out of a seatbelt or something like that, which this does have a seatbelt cutter built in, but maybe you need to do something that's around a person and you don't necessarily want to cut them. Things like this are great because it's a lot easier to puncture and pierce with shapes like this.
Trimming clothes.
Yeah.
You have to get them.
Yeah, if you have to get up close to somebody or yourself, it's a lot harder to hurt yourself with blade shapes like this. So these are really popular on rescue knives. And then, you know, something like this Benchmade, the Triage, has the rescue hook built in as well, which is, I use actually more than the blade when I carry this knife. Great for opening packages and boxes and stuff like that.
One thing about the Wharncliffe too is it has a really strong tip as far as bringing down, and it's very detailed, which is still similar to the sheep's foot.
And there's a lot of other blade shapes out there. You know, most of these companies, they'll have modified and then whatever. You know, modified drop points, modified sheep's foots. Companies are doing a whole lot of different things. But I think that covers the major different styles. Oh, spear point. So spear point is where the top and bottom, so your spine and then your cutting edge, kind of have the same shape to them, and they come to a point. And these again are really great for piercing. You see a lot of like bushcraft and survival knives that'll have this kind of point on them because they're good for digging fire notches or getting into some punk wood and digging something out of it. They're nice for getting into things and kind of working their way around. So that's pretty much it on the blade shapes and geometry and all that. We'll talk about autos and all that kind of stuff.
Straight edge serrations.
Okay, you want to touch on that?
Yeah, you know, there's a lot of different preferences. Do we have one that's, we don't have one that's fully, you know, with the straight edge or with serrations. I think the most popular typically is straight edge, but very versatile is the both serrations and the flat. Mainly for cutting cord, cutting wood, things like that. I mean, this is exceptional. But then you don't really have any way to really slice. I think I read one place where it said you don't want your surgeon using a serrated blade to do surgery because it splits open. You have something that is straight like this, you can cut a lot cleaner. So that's one of the, personally, I prefer straight edge because they're easier to sharpen, and that's probably the biggest thing. But this is definitely more versatile with some of your serrations. So.
The biggest thing is if you're cutting a lot of rope. So a lot of boating guys, or especially kayakers that are buying a dedicated rescue knife that they want it to cut through rope as well as it possibly can, then a full serrated or half serrated knife is a lot of times the way to go. For everybody else, usually I find plain edge. You know, you're talking about ease of sharpening. A lot of these manufacturers have warranties where you can send it back to them and pay $5 or whatever and have them clean it up and resharpen the edge. Most of them won't sharpen the serrations, so that's another thing to keep in mind. You know, it's hard for you to sharpen them, the manufacturer won't sharpen them, so unless you really want those serrations, we always try to talk people out of it. Yeah, plain edge is definitely the way to go. What, autos? Automatic knives. This isn't going to apply to, I think, 34 of the states that are going to be watching this video and most of the rest of the world. But here in Georgia, we're allowed to have automatic knives. I think there's 16 or 18 states in the nation that are allowed to have autos now. And when I say an auto, what I mean is when you are opening a blade, like this Triage right here, my finger is actually touching the blade. So I'm touching the thumb stud and I'm fully opening it with my finger. The assisted, can I see your knife? So assisted opening, generally what it is you have to open it with your hand by touching some part of the blade, whether it's the flipper or the thumb stud or whatever, about 30% of the way opening. So I've got to open it a little bit myself before the rest of the mechanism opens. Automatic knives are, you're not touching it anywhere on the blade. So like this guy is called an out the front, this is the Benchmade Pagan, and you've got this button here that slides up and the blade comes open. They're really great for easy deployment. They are legal nationwide for, I think, military, police, EMTs, and people that only have the use of one arm. But here in Georgia, yeah, I always thought that was a nice little addition, that if you only have one arm, you can carry an auto anywhere. But in Georgia, you can carry them, so it's kind of nice to be able to carry stuff like this. Are they as versatile and useful as your standard folding knife? Probably not. I mean, it'll get a little bit of flack from some of our auto knife manufacturers. But the thing about a folding knife is, even if the mechanism fails, or even if it's automatic knife that's a folding knife like this, where you push a button to get it out, even if the automatic mechanism fails, you still have a functional knife. With something like this, if the automatic mechanism fails, you lost your knife. People ask if they can pierce through things. It's pretty easy to see that they don't. You know, if it comes up against some resistance, the mechanism won't deploy. But they're cool. They make a cool sound. They're fun to play with. They're really easy to use with one hand. And you know, a lot of people, when you're getting it out quickly, they're concerned about the blade opening or something like that. The blade is going to open straight out. They're nice to have. They're fun to play with, and a lot of people like carrying them. I recommend them. They're fun to have. Do you have any out the fronts? Can you even carry them in South Carolina?
It's kind of vague, but I think that I believe you can, but I'm not sure. I'm not going to say you can or can't. The laws there are pretty. There's just not a lot of laws about carrying, and it's usually municipalities. So, but yeah, that's cool. It reminds me of a German paratrooper or something.
Yeah. Is it as useful and well-rounded as the rest of these knives up here? Probably not, but again, it's still fun to have. So that's an automatic out the front, and then you've also got automatics like the one I just showed, this Benchmade right here, where you're not touching the blade, but you've got a button on the side and you just press it and the blade deploys. These are nice as well. You know, you don't have to flick the blade open, you don't have to worry about it not deploying properly or anything like that. And then another nice thing that a lot of the automatic knives are going to have are locking mechanisms. So once you have it open or closed, you can lock it in place, then you don't have to worry about it closing on you. And it becomes not totally a fixed blade, but a little bit more secure than your standard folding knife. So that's a nice feature that a lot of automatic knives have. So that's pretty much all I have. Do you have anything else to add about generals of knives?
Just that I love them.
I love them too. Carry one every day, sometimes two, sometimes three. No, I'm just kidding.
Well, it's like the story I told last time is, you know, and this bears repeating, but, you know, a buddy of mine was in law enforcement, he's now in law enforcement, but when he was a kid, you know, his cousins were kind of rough, and they tied him up to a tree one time, and he slipped, and they left, and he slipped, and the rope got caught around his neck, and he said if he hadn't had a knife that day, he would have died. And so every morning when I get up, and I don't think of it every morning, but a lot of times I think, you know what, I got to grab my knife, because you never know what kind of situation you're in. I mean, if I had one tool, it would be a knife. Typically a fixed blade knife, if it was just one tool I could have. But having a knife is the ultimate tool, really, to have.
There's a video on Live Leak, or one of those sites that makes you uncomfortable when you watch videos on it, that somebody was in a car and it was on fire. And there were a bunch of people around and nobody had a knife. You know, there's this person that they got out. Somebody actually did eventually show up with a knife, but the car was on fire, and there's several people around saying, does anybody have a knife? Does anybody have a knife? I personally don't want to be in that situation. You know, you talk about self-defense and things like that, and I don't worry about that as much. But the situations like Don was talking about, you know, stuff happens. I use my knife on a daily basis, and I hope it's never for an emergency or rescue situation. But it's nice to have just in case.
That's right.
Does anybody have any questions about anything that we went over? Anything they want to learn more about? No questions this time? That's unusual.
Yeah.
What you got?
So if you're resharpening or reprofiling a blade, do you have a specific angle that you prefer for like an EDC knife, like a certain degree or angle that you go for normally?
No. I usually just go with whatever the manufacturer has. I don't have any personal preference. The biggest thing is you got to think about the edge geometry. So when you start getting in to closer to a right angle, it's not going to cut into the material as well, but it's also going to be more durable. So it depends on what you're using the knife for. You know, are you doing a lot of food prep with it? You're cutting into a lot of tomatoes and meats and things like that, where maybe you want to have, you know, a little bit less of an angle just to be able to slice into things and pierce things a little bit easier. It's all about what you're using the knife for. So me personally, I think most of mine are around like 18, 20, somewhere around there.
Thanks.
What you got?
Hollow-handled survival knives, like the Schrade or the old school
CRK, yep.
Yeah. What's y'all's take on?
I've never used one personally. No, I take that back. When I was like 8 years old, I had one of the Rambo survival knives that probably everybody else in this room had at some point in their lives. I think it's, I don't know, the Chris Reeves I think is the exception because of the way it's manufactured. You can still do a lot of the hard use stuff with it. A lot of the other ones I've seen, especially the less expensive ones, they'll do stuff like they'll weld the blade to the handle, or you've only got a tiny bit of blade material going down into the handle. So I personally think it's a lot easier just to get a survival kit and then your knife. There's a lot of really nice sheaths out there, like even these Beckers come with a nice sheath that I think they still do, where it has a little pocket on the front. So I mean, the pocket on the front has as much space as your hollow handle. I'd rather have the more substantial blade that I know can handle more abuse and more hard use than having, you know, the hollow handle. But I see the appeal. It is kind of cool.
I've got a couple of those charades, and they're not welded. They're strong.
Yeah,
and they are strong. But
those are relatively new, though.
yeah, but yeah, if they do. But personally, again, I agree with Marshall. I would rather have the full tang that you can really use it. One thing about those old survival knives is this guy that wrote the modern day for the coming economic collapse down in Argentina for FAO. They had a big economic collapse down there back in 2001. And one of the things he said is he had one of those old Rambo knives during that time, and he said it functioned like crazy. He said it was awesome. You know, he said he had to sharpen it and do it, but you know, you use whatever tools you have.
Yeah.
And you know, learning it now, you ever need it later on, you're able to adapt.
It goes back to what we've been talking about kind of throughout this, and pretty much every class we've ever taught is the most useful tool is the one you have on you. You know, if that's the knife that you have, then that's the knife that you have. Is it going to be the best thing for every task? Maybe not, but it's a knife. You know, knives are useful tools. Again, pretty much everything we sell can do most of the tasks out there. So when you start getting into the more specialized and hard use and that kind of stuff, where you start to see all the different shapes and materials and all that differentiate. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
Speaking of that, like, what would you recommend first-time knife buyer? One knife.
Yep.
You know, an $80 to $100 range or less.
Benchmade Griptilian. Benchmade Griptilian is a lot of people's starter nice knife. So they're all around $100. They have a million variations of them. On their website, I think they literally have a million variations of them because they have all these different steels and everything. But even us dealers, we have access to probably 50 or 60 variations of the same knife. Can you grab one? The case. The Benchmade Griptilian is nice because it's lightweight. It has good steel on it. It has a great lock. You know, that's something we didn't talk about, is locking mechanisms at all.
No, we didn't.
There's a lot of different locking mechanisms out there. We won't go into that too much. The Benchmade has an axis lock, which I really like. Both of our zero tolerances have a frame lock, which is where the frame goes over and actually holds the blade in place, and then you push it over. You've got here's the axis lock on the other Benchmade, the Cybert. It's really nice because it's ambidextrous. So, you know, if you're left-handed or anything like that, no matter what, you're going to be pulling back on this to close the blade. It's really easy to do one-handed. It's really strong, and there's very little chance that you're going to accidentally close it. So there's some lockbacks and stuff like that. This guy right here is a lockback where the lock is on the back of the knife. Spyderco does something nice where they put this little curvature in here. If you think about if that curvature isn't there and you're gripping it, you're doing some hard use, you know, your finger can get in there, or part of your palm can get in there, and even actually right now I can feel the blade, or I can feel the blade getting some play in it just by squeezing it. So the axis lock on Benchmade is really nice because there's very little chance of anything like that happening. Frame locks are also very good. Liner locks are pretty popular, especially with the less expensive knives, because it's a pretty inexpensive way to do it. I don't have any right in front of me, but there's a lot of different locking mechanisms, but the Benchmade Griptilian is what we recommend to everybody that comes in here looking for a good starting knife. It's got that drop point blade shape that's so useful and so, you know, well-rounded. It's got a nice lightweight handle. Again, I go back to the thing where people pick this up and they're like, oh, it feels cheap. It's not. It's extremely durable. It's lightweight. It has really good grip to it. It's a great material. If you want aluminum or you want G10 or anything like that, they make pretty much the same knife with all those materials. But especially for a pocket knife or something where you're going backpacking and weight's a concern, this is a great material and this is a great knife. So the Benchmade Griptilian is what I recommend, especially in that price range. Anybody else?
Yeah, for reversible pocket clips, do you prefer tip up or tip down carry?
I prefer tip up, just because the way I pull the knife out of my pocket, you know, it's already in the position where it's ready to go. So I can flip it open or open it up. I personally prefer tip up. A lot of companies will only make tip down because they say the tip up is a safety concern. I've never really had that issue, and what they're talking about is, well, if you think like this is in my pocket, if something catches on the thumb stud or the flipper or anything like that and pops it open, well, you got a pretty good chance of stabbing yourself in the leg. I've never had that happen. I've never talked to anybody where that's happened, but I understand the concern. I understand why some companies do that. I personally definitely prefer tip up because it's ready to go when you pull it out of your pocket.
Me too.
Anybody else? We good to go? Thanks everybody. Thanks for listening.
All right, thank you guys.
Thank you.